Have you ever been replaced by someone who couldn't do half of what you did, but had the right connections? That's what happened to William Johnson. He was fired at 55 without warning, after 27 years of dedication and top-level performance. But the real reason? His boss wanted to see his mistress every day, and gave her William's job. Only he made a fatal mistake. He thought a quiet, mature, and dignified man wouldn't know how to fight back. What happened next involved betrayal, theft, public exposure, and a comeback no one saw coming. Get ready. This story doesn't end the way they thought it would. It had been 27 years of commitment, and we're not talking about some regular employee. William Johnson was the kind of professional who knew everything by heart, from the logic behind the internal systems to the behavior of everyone who sat around him. At 55, he was like a living encyclopedia in that office. So when his boss called him in for a quick chat, he thought it was just another one of those meetings where he'd fix problems only he could solve. But it wasn't. It was his last conversation as an employee of the company. William barely had time to sit down. The speech was rehearsed, cold, almost robotic. The boss said the company was going through a phase of organizational rejuvenation, and unfortunately, that included cutting his position. Truth is, William didn't even hear half of what came after that. Deep down, he knew. This wasn't about age. It was something else. Something brewing in the shadows. And it smelled like betrayal. A betrayal far more personal than professional. Do you see how the word rejuvenation was used as a cover-up? In the corporate world, the truth rarely shows up in a polished press release. And that's where the danger lies. Many people are discarded for reasons that have nothing to do with performance. I've seen men and women fired not because they underperformed, but because they knew too much, made others uncomfortable, or stood in someone's way. When that happens, it's not enough to be outraged. You have to observe, document, prepare, because the game can flip at any moment. And here's the key. Not every injustice has to end in silence. Some people leave quietly, heads down, as if they were guilty of aging. But William wasn't that kind of man. And if you're going through something similar, being pushed aside, isolated, or underestimated because of your age, start mapping out the details now. Write down dates, save emails, document meetings. Revenge, when necessary, begins with the quiet sharpness of a well-trained memory. Because the pain of being discarded isn't just professional. It hits your sense of self-worth. It shakes the ground under someone who, for years, was the backbone of a team. And when that kind of robbery happens, yes, taking someone's dignity like that is a kind of theft. What comes next is a mix of humiliation and rage. Rage for having trusted, for having given your best and still being thrown away like an old piece of paper. And that kind of pain, if properly channeled, can turn into the strongest tool for a comeback. But William didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't throw a fit. He just shook his boss's hand with a blank expression and walked out the door without saying a word. But don't be fooled. That wasn't a sign of weakness. His silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. And that's where the story starts to take a turn. No one, absolutely no one, at the company saw coming. 3 days after William left, a completely unexpected figure appeared in the company hallways. Young, flashy, and wearing heels taller than her experience in the department, the new hire walked in like she already knew it was all hers. No internal announcement, no email to the team, just a new colleague who barely knew how to turn on a computer. And yet she showed up with star status, and a name badge that looked like it had been printed before William was even fired. The veteran employees exchanged glances, but no one said a word. After all, who would dare question such a peculiar hire? Some chuckled quietly, others whispered at the coffee machine. But what stood out most wasn't the lack of experience on her resume. It was the way the boss looked at her every time she walked into his office. It wasn't the look you give a promising talent. It was the kind of look that holds secrets. And secrets, my friend, are like cracks in an old ceiling. Eventually, the whole thing comes crashing down. There's something dangerous about a workplace being manipulated by personal desires. And this is one of the most silent forms of betrayal in corporate life, when merit is replaced by convenience. I've seen it before. Entire departments, promising projects shelved just because someone used their power for personal gain, or just to see a special someone every day. That's not just unethical, it's toxic. It corrodes team trust and, even worse, the sense of fairness among people who work hard every day. And let's be clear, this wasn't jealousy or gossip. This was structural damage. The company didn't just lose a veteran with decades of experience. It gained someone who didn't have the slightest idea what she was doing. And that, over time, comes at a cost. A cost in performance, in clients, in money, and sometimes in reputation. And when the motivation behind it is a poorly hidden affair, the risk goes far beyond productivity. It becomes poison to the entire workplace culture. The most surprising part? She acted like she was untouchable. She made jokes at the wrong time, interrupted meetings with random comments, and still walked out of the boss's office with that same smug smile. She seemed bulletproof, and for a while she was. Because when passion walks in through the front door of leadership, competence slips out the back. But what no one knew, or pretended not to notice, is that these kinds of workplace romances almost never end quietly, and definitely not without a price. And while she settled into William's old position, using the same chair and opening the same files, little did they know they were sitting at the center of a future explosion. Because not all thefts involve money. Some involve space, legacy, and respect. And that's exactly what started to get drained away. But just like every castle built on quicksand, all it takes is the first tremor. It was only a matter of time before the rumors turned into whispers, and the whispers into near confessions. All you had to do was pay attention. The new hire spent more time in the boss's office than at her own desk. One-on-one meetings were frequent, and their lunch breaks, way too synchronized to be a coincidence. People started wondering, what kind of feedback required closed doors and muffled laughter? Nobody wanted to be the first to confirm what everyone already knew. But all it took was one slip-up. A door not fully closed, a reflection in the glass, a quick kiss but caught. And that was it. What had been suspicion turned into certainty. A secret romance between the boss and his subordinate, mixing pleasure with power. And worse, using the role that once belonged to William as a front for daily rendezvous. The betrayal was no longer symbolic. It was literal. That's the part that hurts the most. Realizing you were fired not because of performance or age, but for convenience. William lost his job so another man could keep his mistress close and on payroll. For many, that kind of theft doesn't show up in financial reports, but it stings just as bad. A theft of dignity, of space, of history. A deep insult to decades of honest dedication. And don't think this kind of thing is rare. In mid to large-sized companies, trading job titles for personal relationships still happens more often than people are willing to admit. It destroys internal balance and creates a culture where real skill takes a backseat, and appearances run the show. I've seen entire departments collapse because a promotion was earned in bed, not through hard work. In William's case, the impact went even deeper. The team started to deflate. Good professionals who had admired his leadership began wondering who might be next. And when leadership becomes a joke, productivity drops with it. William's silence had been strategic, but the discomfort inside the company kept growing like a cracked tile, more visible, more awkward, and harder to ignore. But there was something the couple didn't count on: loyalty. William might have walked out the front door, but he left behind loyal friends in that company. People who knew the truth, who saw the game happening behind the curtains, and who were starting to get uncomfortable with the farce. Because there are some things we can tolerate, but blatant injustice? That itches the soul. And when indignation meets courage, the first step of revenge is already underway. At first, it was just small inconsistencies. A reimbursement slightly higher than usual. A dinner logged twice in accounting. An invoice for consulting that no one could link to any real service. But like every quiet betrayal, the signs were there. Subtle, but persistent. And like every great story of theft, it always starts with small amounts that no one notices, until someone with a sharp eye starts connecting the dots. David, William's longtime friend, began spotting those cracks with the nose of someone who knew every penny in that department. He knew how much paper the company used monthly, how long each project took, and even the exact frequency of external meetings. And suddenly, the numbers stopped adding up. It was like a puzzle with the wrong pieces. What used to be a well-oiled operation started showing gaps. And the strangest thing? All the irregularities came from the new employees' department. It wasn't just administrative incompetence. It was something deeper. Purchase orders made without approval, invoices from phantom vendors, and corporate expenses getting bloated by the week. In just 4 months, the revamped department had already racked up extra expenses totaling $18,700, enough to raise red flags even with the sleepiest finance manager. And the question nobody wanted to ask quickly became unavoidable. Where was that money going? That's when you realize the scale of a betrayal that mixes romance with power. Because when trust is based on what happens in bed, ethics walks out the front door. And when the boss is emotionally involved with the person he's supposed to oversee, who's left to audit the auditor? The company, without even realizing it, was being robbed twice, financially and morally. Every dollar misused was another blow to the meritocracy, the one companies preach but rarely practice. If you've ever gone through something like this, you know, the feeling of helplessness in the face of injustice is toxic. You want to scream, to expose everything, but fear of retaliation makes many people stay quiet. But William wasn't just anybody, and David, now holding piles of suspicious reports, began crafting a plan built on strategic silence, emotional intelligence, and a heavy dose of patience. Because real revenge isn't served cold, it's slow-cooked. And as the numbers kept going off track, a new certainty began to form among the more observant employees. This wasn't going to end well. The mask of efficiency was cracking. What once seemed like just an office romance was starting to reek of theft. A calculated theft, disguised as operational adjustments. But anyone who knows the inner workings of a company knows, when the numbers scream, even those pretending not to hear are forced to listen. David was the kind of person most overlook at first, quiet, observant, methodical. But behind that calm exterior was a razor-sharp mind and an almost photographic memory. He'd known William since back when everything was done by hand, when spreadsheets were printed and file cabinets ruled the office. And more than anything, he knew William's character. He knew that man wasn't let go by accident. He knew there was betrayal, and maybe something even worse. What David did was something few people have the guts to do. He stayed quiet and started watching. He cross-checked data in silence, compared signatures, verified stamps, and little by little, he gathered an insane amount of evidence. Messages sent at odd hours, reimbursement requests that didn't match, approvals that broke every standard. All with the calm precision of a seasoned investigator. He knew that to bring down that lie, you couldn't just accuse, you had to map out the rot completely. And why did he do it? Simple. Loyalty. Because in a world where ego runs the show, finding someone who stands up for another person without expecting anything in return is rare. And when you find someone like that, you understand the power of true alliances. David wasn't just uncovering the financial theft. He was also exposing the theft of legacy, the theft of moral ground, the theft of someone's story. And he chose to act. Not for glory, but for justice. That kind of attitude teaches you a lot. It teaches that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is stay silent until the time is right. It shows that revenge, when paired with wisdom, can become a higher form of redemption. And more than anything, it shows that good people can organize too. What David built was a chessboard, and like any skilled player, he started positioning each piece with surgical precision. The king and queen were exposed, only one move left. But even so, the risk was massive. He was dealing with people in power. If discovered too soon, he could be silenced, sabotaged, even fired. But the anger that grows from injustice can be an incredible fuel. And David used that fuel well. He built digital folders, backed up files to the cloud, quietly spoke to coworkers who were also suspicious. It was like he was building a missile, just waiting for the right button to push. And with each passing day, he watched the mistress strut around like she owned the department, the boss pretending nothing was wrong, and the numbers, more off than ever. But what neither of them knew was that, while they slept soundly, a bomb of truth was being assembled, piece by someone they'd never suspect. And once it exploded, there'd be no turning back. Because when truth meets loyalty, it turns into ammunition. The morning seemed ordinary. Hot coffee, small talk, keyboards clicking in rhythm. But David knew this wasn't going to be just any morning. He had spent the night reviewing every attachment, renaming every file, organizing evidence like a prosecutor prepping for court. And at 8:47 a.m., with one simple click, the email was sent to the entire company. The subject line was blunt. What you need to know about who's running this department. Nobody saw it coming. It took just 5 minutes for people to start looking around, confused and unsettled. Attached were screenshots of intimate messages between the boss and the mistress, spreadsheets with inflated numbers, improper approvals bearing the official stamp. There was even a series of strange bank transfers totaling $18,700 siphoned off in less than 5 months. This wasn't just an internal scandal anymore. It was a corporate war, and betrayal now had a face, a date, and a dollar amount. The office turned into a minefield. People running through hallways, doors slamming, phones ringing nonstop. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads in disbelief. No one knew who sent the email, but everyone knew what it meant. The castle built on appearances had collapsed. That so-called meritocracy? A joke. All that talk about ethical leadership? Another lie. And the ones who felt it the most were those who had stayed silent when William was wronged. Now the truth was screaming from every direction. This kind of exposure is a game changer. It separates leaders from manipulators. It reveals how power can be weaponized and how revenge, when crafted with precision, doesn't need shouting or drama, just facts. And here's a hard truth worth remembering. Evidence is stronger than opinion. In a world where everything becomes a matter of perspective, well-organized proof still holds the power to destroy any lie. And David understood that better than most. The board tried to respond fast. Emergency meetings, efforts to contain the leak, internal memos written in cold corporate tone. But it was too late. The story had already spilled outside. Someone shared the email on social media. Within an hour, a former employee posted the allegations on LinkedIn. And when the internet gets its hands on a story about betrayal, theft, and corporate revenge, there's no PR team in the world that can stop it. The scandal was irreversible. And in the middle of all that chaos, William read the email silently, sitting in a coffee shop near the office. He smiled, not out of spite, but relief. This wasn't just exposure, it was a turning point. His comeback wasn't about pats on the back, it was about restored justice. And there was still more to come. Because when a story like this starts spreading, what happens next can be even more powerful. The company did everything it could to contain the fallout. Cold generic emails were sent out to staff using phrases like unfortunate misunderstanding and internal procedures underway. But by that point, no one was buying the corporate script. The truth had already leaked beyond the screen's edges and gone viral like wildfire. It was way too late. The screenshots were in forums, workgroup chats, and even posted anonymously on a popular whistleblower site. Employees, once silent, now felt validated. And when the pain of collective betrayal meets undeniable proof, something stronger than anger is born. Courage. Courage to tell their stories, to bring up other ignored incidents, to reveal how favoritism had been rotting the department for months. People who never had a voice began speaking up. The scandal became meeting room gossip, turned into a full-blown internal crisis, and even made local headlines. And just like any rotten structure, all it needed was a push to start crumbling. The board watched contracts get suspended, clients demanding answers, and even long-term partners reconsidering their alliances. The company's name appeared on compliance blogs and informal blacklists. And all because someone in power used their position to satisfy personal desire, and tried to cover up nearly $20,000 in theft behind doctored spreadsheets. A classic case of greed with a side of emotional stupidity, and a harsh reminder that unchecked ego is expensive. And maybe the most symbolic part of it all was what happened inside those office walls. Empty rooms, tense meetings, people quitting voluntarily. The workplace that once buzzed with energy now felt like a building haunted by a ruined reputation. The mistress hadn't shown up in days. The boss vanished, and the people left behind felt like they'd just woken up from a nightmare, unsure if they were free or stepping into the next chapter of it. Veteran employees know, scandals like this leave scars no rebrand can fix. The betrayal from leadership, the theft disguised as management, the lie of a promotion earned in secret, it all destroys more than a public image. It destroys trust. And trust, unlike money, isn't easy to rebuild. At this point, William's name started coming up again in the hallways. Not out of pity, but respect. If he were still here, this never would have happened, they whispered. But the world keeps turning. And justice, uneven when it takes time, tastes sweeter when it finally arrives. William watched it all unfold from a distance, quietly. Then the phone rang. A familiar number. A nervous voice on the other end. An unexpected invitation. Because once the mask falls, all that's left is trying to recover what was lost. And sometimes the only way to regain respect is by asking back the one you threw away. The invitation came in a nearly formal tone, but it was filled with silent regret. The board, now under pressure from investors and public opinion, knew they needed a strong, symbolic gesture. And who better than William Johnson to represent ethics, skill, and redemption? The offer was clear. Return as a senior consultant with a higher salary, full autonomy, and the respect he never should have lost. Not out of kindness, but out of necessity. William listened in silence. No sarcasm, no questions. He just asked for time to think. Because real revenge isn't about humiliation, it's about proving you never had to scream to win. He spoke with lawyers, friends, and followed his own instincts. And when he finally accepted, he made one thing clear. He wasn't coming back to relive the past. He came to redefine the future. His return wasn't a comeback. It was a repositioning. From someone who never should have been pushed out in the first place. When he walked through the front doors weeks later, everything stopped. Everyone knew what he'd been through. They knew about the betrayal, the theft, the plot that almost ruined his name. But there he was, sharp, calm, and stronger than ever. There was no arrogance in his eyes, just resolve. And sometimes, that resolve speaks louder than any outburst. Because the best revenge is continuing to grow, even when someone tried to erase you. The mistress never made a public statement. The boss, fired for cause, now facing a corporate fraud investigation. The couple who orchestrated the scam vanished, but left behind a trail of shame and damage. William, on the other hand, became a kind of quiet legend, mentioned in meetings, used as a case study in trainings, respected even by people who'd never met the man he used to be. His comeback became the internal spark for real change, and it's amazing how life eventually puts things in place. William didn't just get his job back, he reinvented himself. He launched a mentoring program for older professionals, gave talks on corporate ethics, and even turned down offers from other companies. Because he understood his mission wasn't just professional, it was symbolic. He became living proof that it's possible to survive betrayal, overcome theft, and serve revenge. With class. But the most powerful thing of all, he never yelled, never cursed, never lowered himself to the level of those who wronged him. And still, he won. Because in a noisy world, the one who stands firm in truth always finds their way back. And sometimes that place is higher than anyone ever imagined. And you? Are you still letting people walk all over you in silence? Or are you finally ready to turn every betrayal you've suffered into strength to fight back? How many times have they stolen your space, your credit, your respect, and you stayed quiet out of fear of seeming bitter? It's time to reclaim your dignity. Revenge doesn't have to be dirty, and overcoming doesn't have to be humiliating. The truth is, you've got more power than you think. You just need to learn how to use it smart. Share in the comments what you've kept quiet about, and hit that subscribe button so no one ever silences your story again.